Hey, two friends. I want to thank everyone for all their nifty comments on my last video about this truck and the engine miss. And I figure out what I'm going to do, and let me show you this first. This is the overflow for the engine coolant, and if you look at the last video and this video, it's down a little bit further, and all I did was just run this engine for about 20 minutes yesterday when I did the video. So it went down another about 3/16 of an inch. So it's not leaking because I watched it and there's nothing leaking out of the engine. So it has to be being consumed by the engine, or not really consumed because it won't burn, but it's being introduced into the cylinders. So I was thinking about taking all the spark plugs out and investigating them and see if I have like a foul plug or two. And I changed my mind on that. I'll tell you why. Because the plugs, I may have a couple that are slightly fouled, but see, when I run this engine, it misses worse when it's cold. And I figure the engine's running at less efficiency when it's cold, and when it heats up, it runs better, and that's because, you know, it's more efficient and it can tolerate a little the antifreeze going into it, or the coolant going into the engine. But when it's cold, it can't tolerate that, and that's why it's missing more. That's what I figure. But I also figure that what's the sense of going through all the trouble taking these plugs out, cleaning them, putting them back in? Because there's no sense of running the engine and rooting the engine, because you know, the coolant that's circulating with the oil, if it's getting inside the oil, that's going to ruin the bearings of the engine. And right now I don't know how much coolant is getting into the oil unless I drain the oil. So the bottom line is, I'm just going to have to take the manifold off here, the intake, and see where it's leaking. And if it's leaking at the intake, that's great, because I could just put a new intake manifold gasket on pretty easily. But if I don't see anything leaking around the intake manifold gasket, that would suggest that the heads are leaking somehow. So I'll have to cross that bridge when I get to it. So I think the first step would be to replace the intake manifold gasket. There's no sense of, you know, putting the plugs in, gapping them, you know, running the engine around when I know that the coolant is disappearing, and it's just disappearing, just idling here in the driveway. So it has to be going into the engine internally. But thanks a lot again for all your comments, because they made me figure out what I'm going to do. I really appreciate those comments. Thank you very much. Bye. Have a great weekend.